What's good? It's Woog. So I'm thinking about the upcoming fight between Vasyl Lomachenko and Teofimo Lopez, one of the most magnificent fights that you could think to make in boxing, and truly one of the more I have no idea how this will play out type of fights. In fact, this might be more of an unpredictable fight than even Oscar De La Hoya versus Fernando Vargas when De La Hoya fought him later in his career. And that's one of the reasons why it was such a 50-50, is because you had Vargas in a slightly sweeter spot in his career than you had Oscar. Although Fernando Vargas had already fought Felix Trinidad and suffered a pretty brutal late dogfight TKO. But Vargas was significantly younger than Oscar, and Oscar was also up at 154, Vargas's stomping grounds. Oscar ended up winning that, and there was so much trash talk going into it. I mean, Vargas was getting very cultural. He was really representing leading up to the fight. And at the time, he's also trained by Robert Garcia of the Oxnard camp. So Vargas was actually one of the first major, superstars coming out of that Oxnard stable. And so, yeah, Vargas was just letting Oscar kind of have it. So there was a lot of bad blood going into this. In fact, after Oscar won that fight via TKO, Jim Lampley, I think it was Jim Lampley, said, "This is the most satisfying win of Oscar's career." And this was a storied, legendary career, Oscar De La Hoya, one of the greatest to do it. And this was on the back nine of Oscar's career, the latter half. And this was considered to be the most satisfying win of Oscar's career. So that was 50-50-ish, but I still think that this Lomachenko-Lopez fight feels more just uncertain. I think this also feels more uncertain than Errol Spence versus Shawn Porter. I would say going into Errol Spence versus Kell Brook, or at the time you would say Kell Brook versus Errol Spence, since it was Kell Brook defending his IBF title after he took that vicious TKO orbital bone breaking loss against Triple G up at 160. He came back down to defend at 147. It felt 50-50-ish going in just because of how he had performed against Shawn Porter well before that. Kell Brook was looking like one of the best pound for pound fighters in the sport for a minute. But I feel like that fight was more just totally uncertain than Errol Spence versus Shawn Porter. I feel like 80% of fight fans would lean Errol Spence in that. And it just so happens you also get the case where you did in this fight where the person overachieves. The B-side fighter overachieves, exceeds your expectation, and it ends up looking like a 50-50 fight by the end of round 12. I had the Errol Spence knockdown being the difference, so very close decision for Spence. But I'm saying going into these fights, it really doesn't get too much more, and these different things that you have to consider before you can really lean into a prediction either way. I'm still favoring Lomachenko, but because I think that I can envision more ways of him winning than Lopez. Lopez kind of has to just spark him, really put his lights out, or close. Really get that leg wobbly. But I feel like we might encounter that moment where it's like, oh shoot, you look at Lomachenko's eyes and he's clearly buzzed. I feel like we might get one of those to where he then does collect himself, does make it out of the round, like Anthony Joshua did against Vladimir Klitschko, and then composes himself and then acts like a generational champion should. I feel like this will be that signature win that really elevates Lomachenko to all-time status, especially in the lower weight classes. How you compare the lower weight classes, meaning like 122 to 126 and 130 versus 135 and 147, and if you're more likely to elevate people on your GOAT list based on them operating at the weight class where you were familiar with more of the names at that time. But if Lomachenko delivers and wins this, even though he's the favorite, him beating somebody who at the moment is as significant and buzzworthy as Teofimo Lopez, that would just be that, the veteran handled his business against this super charismatic young lion who's just waiting to be able to say, I shook up the world. Teofimo Lopez is 23 years old. That would be remarkable. And that was actually my reluctance, just saying, damn, you want that smoke that early? Whew. I mean, hats off to you. Like, Lomachenko is as tough a puzzle to solve as there is in the sport. And Lopez has a whole lot of belief in himself, and he's got devastating power. That can psychologically keep him in it. Just knowing that he could press the button at the right time with the right hair trigger quickness, and the fight's a whole different story. Sometimes I think that could carry him through the darker moments for him when things are clearly not going his way, and you just see Lomachenko start to just put his foot on the gas a little harder, start picking up the volume to where it's now like he's working a bag. But you can only be so liberal with your output against somebody who's as dangerous a counterpuncher as Lopez and as athletic as Lopez. So I'm still leaning Lomachenko, but yeah, I think that this is a very unique problem. This is probably the most dangerous fight of his career, and not just because we've already seen him do everything that he already did. So it's like, yeah, this feels dangerous, right? So it must be the most dangerous. I mean, you would have to look to like Nicholas Walters, who has stopped Nonito Donaire when Donaire tried to go up to 126. Lomachenko beat him handedly, had him quit on the stool in the middle rounds, and Walters was undefeated at the time. Hard puncher. Gary Russell Jr., who Lomachenko took on in his third professional fight, he outclassed Gary Russell Jr. I haven't seen anybody come close to outclassing Gary Russell Jr. since. Although I haven't seen Gary Russell Jr. in like the top 5 fights I would love to see him in. Jorge Linares is obviously no joke. He put, Lomachenko on his butt at one point during the fight. And that's one of Lomachenko's more recent fights. I believe he's fought Crolla, Pedraza, after like a shoulder surgery. That's another thing to consider. I mean, we know that he's obviously been clicking on all cylinders. He put Crolla out in the early rounds. He stopped Linares after getting dropped. Luke Campbell was a tough decision win. But yeah, all of these fights are at 135. And this appears to be Lomachenko's physical ceiling. You see certain fighters be able to then go up to 140, 147. I don't see evidence that would work out well. Just given the age and where he currently is, weight class wise. But yeah, a win over Teofimo Lopez, who earned a share of the title by dramatically stopping Richard Comey in the early rounds. That type of momentum is the perfect momentum that you want leading up into the fight, where you just look like, you've got fireworks in your hand. And is it fool's gold? I don't think so. We've seen him do it enough times so where it's like, yeah, be careful around that boy. So I don't think it's fool's gold. But is it developed enough to handle a still either prime or close to prime Lomachenko? I don't know. I don't know. It's a question about the depth of game. But sometimes when you're just gifted with the ability to do it with one punch, I mean, you can be defanged, you can become deconstructed, but the opponent always needs to be careful. So as long as Lopez is standing up and has confidence in throwing his hands, we've got to fight. As long as he's doing that, we've got to fight. Because that means he believes we've still got to fight. And that's all that matters. But yeah, I truly can't wait for this one. We got a good one.